The organ's first chord had barely rolled through the old stone church when every pew seemed to breathe in all at once, as though the walls themselves understood how fragile the next few minutes were going to be. Outside, July's sunlight glittered through stained glass saints, scattering ruby and sapphire shards across the aisle where rose petals waited like tiny promises. The congregation leaned forward, parents squeezing nervous children's hands, grandparents blinking tears free before they had permission. At the front, framed by candles and the hand-carved oak altar, stood Rebecca Grace Williamson, the bride, ivory veil draped like morning mist, eyes shining with the kind of hope that makes strangers silently root for your whole life to go right. Just beyond the first row, her sister, Hannah, adjusted her pearl comb and forced a smile that had taken weeks of rehearsal in bathroom mirrors. Few people knew that when they were girls, Rebecca gave Hannah the last slice of birthday cake, or that Hannah once prayed she could trade her freckles for her sister's dimpled grin. No one suspected jealousy, because jealousy usually hides behind practiced generosity. Hannah had spent the entire morning fastening Rebecca's corset ribbons, steaming the train, whispering, "You're perfect," into her sister's anxious ear. She'd even slipped into the sacristy to pray, though her prayer was tangled, half apology, half plea for a sign that she still mattered. It wasn't that she hated Rebecca. She hated how small she felt beside the effortless kindness that seemed to follow Rebecca like sunlight. 2 months earlier, when invitations were still warm from the printer, Hannah overheard their mother on the phone saying, "Rebecca was always our gentle dove, and Hannah, well, Hannah is a survivor." The words, meant with pride, felt like a verdict. Rebecca is loved because she's good, Hannah because she endures. That night Hannah had cried until dawn, scrolling through childhood photos. Rebecca offering a hand to a fallen toddler at church. Hannah in the corner, untangling her own shoelaces. Every picture felt like evidence that goodness and grace belonged to someone else. And then there was Michael, the groom, the one person who had ever seen Hannah's poetry journals and told her she was brilliant. He had belonged to Rebecca from the start, but for one spring semester in college, he and Hannah had shared cafeteria coffee and late-night theology debates where laughter stretched until birds rehearsed sunrise. She learned to love the way he punctuated sentences with his eyebrows, but Michael's heart was already set, and Hannah knew it. When Rebecca announced their engagement, Hannah mailed the couple a congratulatory gift and cried into her pillow for 3 days. The wedding dress was custom-made by a designer who insisted on stitching tiny cameras into the hemline. Officially, it was a security measure. Recent thefts of couture gowns had plagued the boutique, but the devices also captured candid moments for the seamstress's social media campaign. Nobody paid attention to the clause buried in the contract. Rebecca signed it with the same gentle optimism she applied to every signature of her life. Hannah had seen the cameras during a fitting and felt the idea unsettlingly poetic. Even fabric would witness her defeat. In a hidden pocket of her bridesmaid's bouquet, Hannah carried a vial of deep red heritage ink, the kind artists used to illuminate calligraphy Bibles. She'd stolen it from the church supply cabinet the night before, convincing herself she would back out because she was not a villain, just a woman who felt invisible. But jealousy, once cradled, grows teeth. In the vestibule, moments before the processional, Hannah uncapped the vial. The ink inside shimmered like bruised velvet. One drop would spread across taffeta like spilled wine. 10 would turn ivory into accusation. Her hand trembled, not because she doubted the plan, but because part of her hoped someone would stop her and prove she was still visible without catastrophe. Footsteps approached, their father checking on his girls. Hannah hid the vial inside her palm, felt the cool glass kiss her lifeline, and decided fate was complicit. When the music swelled, Hannah stepped behind Rebecca, lifting the train. Each footstep down the aisle was a countdown. Each camera blinked its silent red light. Halfway to the altar, Hannah pinched the fabric edge, twisted the cap with her thumb, and let ink bleed onto the dress's underlayer where it would take seconds to reach the surface. She pictured gasps, Michael's horrified face, pastel-clad guests recording on phones. It would be enough drama to eclipse a lifetime of being second. But ink behaves like truth. It travels. A single rogue drop arced upward, spattering the dress's visible bodice in a jagged crimson starburst. The congregation erupted, a collective hush that felt like a cliff edge giving way. Rebecca halted, eyes darting down, mouth opening in silent question. The organist faltered. And there, at the apex of the aisle, White became wounded, innocence split open by a color reserved for warnings. Michael rushed forward, catching Rebecca's hands. Hannah expected him to recoil, but instead he cupped the stain and whispered something only she could lip-read. "You are still my bride." The words shattered Hannah's internal applause. Rebecca's eyes brimmed, not with shame, but with fierce, stubborn love that refused to let pigment define the ceremony. Then came the second surprise, one no one in that church could anticipate. High above the altar, a projector flared to life. The designer, monitoring her dress remotely, had programmed an automated fail-safe. If damage occurred, the cameras would broadcast footage to a secure cloud and display real-time images on a connected device. The projector was still paired from last night's slideshow rehearsal. Suddenly, every pair of eyes shifted from the stained dress to the 12-foot wall projection showing Hannah uncapping the vial. Gasps turned to murmurs, then to sharp, undeniable recognition. Hannah felt heat crawl up her neck like ivy. It was too late to hide. She turned, hoping to bolt down the aisle, but found rows of stunned relatives forming a corridor of silent judgment. Somewhere, a child began to cry, perhaps sensing the tremor in the room's moral axis. The pastor cleared his throat, attempting to salvage sacred ground now fractured by scandal. "We stand," he began, voice tight, "because love is a covenant, but honesty is its foundation." He beckoned Hannah forward, surprising everyone, maybe even himself. "Before we continue, truth must have its moment." The simple statement felt biblical, prophets calling secret sins to light. Hannah's knees threatened collapse. She moved like someone navigating darkness, even though sunlight still danced through stained glass. She reached the chancel steps where Rebecca stood, gown blooming redder by the heartbeat, yet face calm as sunrise. Michael's hand remained on Rebecca's back, steady as a vow. Words clogged Hannah's throat. All she managed was a ragged whisper. "I'm sorry." The projector, delayed by a few seconds, replayed her apology on the wall, echoing shame. An elderly aunt clutched her pearls. The best man muttered a prayer. Rebecca's response was not what Hannah deserved and precisely what she needed. She stepped forward, lifting her stained skirt enough to navigate the distance between them. Ink dripped onto marble like stigmata. She took Hannah's hands, still dyed red, and said, "We were sisters before this moment, and we'll be sisters after." There was no anger in her voice, only a quiet ache that promised healing if chosen. Michael, eyes glistening, nodded agreement. But the pastor pressed further. "The covenant extends," he said, "not just to bride and groom, but to family. Hannah, will you witness this marriage by supporting, not sabotaging, the love inside it?" His question hung in the rafters, entangled with dust motes and decades of hymns. Hannah looked at the ink staining her cuticles, at the cameras blinking in the hymn, a physical record of her lowest intent, and then at the open faces of a community waiting for redemption. "Yes," she said, voice steadying. "Yes, I will." It was both promise and confession. The pastor gestured to the maid of honor, who stepped from the front pew with tissues and a small bottle of stain remover, the kit every wedding planner keeps but hopes never to use. Together, they blotted the worst of the crimson, turning it from accusation into a shadow of what had been. The cameras captured every dab, every lift of color, every evidence of grace in action. What followed was not a perfect ceremony. It was better. Vows were spoken with raw voices. Rings slid onto trembling fingers. Every guest, having witnessed attempted destruction, now witnessed unflinching commitment. No one scrolled phones. All eyes stayed present, anchored by the weight of a story unfolding in real time. After the recessional, while guests filed into the fellowship hall for lemonade and sheet cake, the designer called, apologetic and horrified at the unintended broadcast. Rebecca laughed, a sound like bells after a storm, and thanked her. You gave us proof that love is stronger than sabotage, she said. The designer, miles away, wept quietly. Outside, beneath an oak where childhood rope swings once hung, Hannah approached Rebecca and Michael. Wind played with the ruined train, now speckled in burgundy lace patterns that looked almost deliberate. Hannah expected dismissal. Instead, Rebecca handed her a corner of the train. Help me carry this into the reception, she said. As they walked, Hannah remembered a Sunday school lesson. Forgiveness is a door you walk through together, not a certificate you receive alone. She inhaled summer air laced with magnolia and possibility. The ink on her hands had dried but would take days to fade, an honest stain she intended to keep until every apology had grown into action. By the time they reached the reception hall, the story had traveled ahead of them, morphing into legend. Some guests whispered of guardian angels controlling projectors. Others framed it as spiritual warfare. But the truth, simple and scandalous, was that cameras meant to guard material value had guarded moral value instead. Technology had pulled a Joseph, turning intended harm into communal good. Before the first dance, Michael tapped a glass for attention. We want to start our marriage with transparency, he said, looking at Hannah. So we've asked Hannah to read the poem she once showed me, the one about envy and the longing to be seen. Shock rippled through the crowd. Hannah's cheeks flared, but Michael's nod held steady encouragement. She recited the poem, voice quivering at first, then gaining momentum like a bird remembering air currents. The poem spoke of shadows begging for sunlight, of hearts kneeling in dusty corners waiting to be named. When she finished, no one clapped. Instead, silence spread, the kind born of communion, not absence. Tears marked cheeks. Even the DJ wiped his eyes. Rebecca embraced her sister, whispering, "Now they see you the way I always did." The cameras, still rolling, captured that hug, and later the footage would go viral, not because it exposed scandal, but because it documented reconciliation in an age addicted to outrage. Strangers online would comment, "I watched this 5 times and still cry, and reminds me to call my own sister." The video would be dissected in sermons about grace, in classrooms discussing digital ethics, and in wedding blogs ranking it the year's most unexpected miracle. Days later, the ink was professionally removed, leaving a faint rose-colored bloom that Rebecca chose to keep unbleached. A reminder that love can absorb wounds and still be beautiful, she explained to anyone who asked. The designer offered a replacement gown free of charge, but Rebecca declined. Photographs from the day showed a bride glowing and imperfect, dress carrying a soft crimson memory, like a heart worn on the outside. Hannah began therapy, attending sessions with sleeves rolled up, literal and metaphorical. She wrote more poems, some about regret, others about the echo of stained glass when secrets finally leave your tongue. They were raw, but she submitted them to a small Christian literary journal, which published them under the title The Hem and the Heart. Michael and Rebecca adopted the cameras from the dress hem, mounting them in their new home's hallway, pointed toward the front door. A reminder, Michael said, that someone is always watching, but more importantly, someone is always forgiving. When dinner guests asked about the strange decor, they told the story, and laughter mingled with disbelief every time. Months turned into seasons. On their first anniversary, Rebecca pulled the stained portion of the dress from a cedar box and asked Hannah to help sew it into a baby quilt. hope for a child not yet conceived. They worked past midnight, stitching prayers between threads. Ink faded further, surrendering to lavender and cream patches, but a faint outline remained, like a fingerprint of mercy. On Easter morning, 2 years later, their daughter was born. They named her Grace Camellia, Grace, for obvious reasons, and Camellia, because camellias bloom even when frost lingers. In family photos, baby Grace lies swaddled in the quilt, asleep beneath the very cloth once soaked in jealousy, now warmed by redemption. The church where it all began hangs a framed still from the projector footage in its foyer, not the moment of sabotage, but the moment Rebecca took Hannah's stained hands. Below it, a brass plaque reads, "Where sin increased, grace abounded all the more." Romans 5 verse 20. Tourists occasionally stop, curious why a small-town church exhibits what looks like a fashion accident. Volunteers tell the tale, and visitors leave with eyes glossy, promising to call estranged siblings. Some skeptics roll their eyes at the melodrama, yet most walk out under the steeple feeling lighter, as if forgiven themselves. Meanwhile, the boutique that installed the cameras pivots its marketing, emphasizing how their craftsmanship guards not just threads, but stories. Sales soar. The designer starts a podcast called In the Hem, interviewing brides about unexpected moments that tested their vows. Episode 1 features Rebecca, Michael, and Hannah, recorded around the quilt-wrapped baby cooing into the microphone. Hannah's literary journal entry leads to a book deal. Editors want the full account, messy, honest, redemptive. She almost declines, fearing exploitation, but Rebecca places the ink-stained vial, now empty and cleaned, into her palm. "Write the miracle," she says. Hannah signs the contract. The book release party is held back in the fellowship hall where lemonade once flowed. This time, they serve sparkling grape juice in crystal glasses, toasting to the improbable holiness of second chances. Attendees receive bookmarks cut from leftover scraps of the ruined train, each thread a testament to how far confession can carry a person. One reviewer calls the memoir a parable for the digital age, where cameras judge but also liberate. Another labels it religious propaganda cloaked in sentiment. Yet even critical voices cannot deny the resonance. Sales climb, not because everyone believes in God, but because everyone knows the ache of wanting to be seen and the terror of being seen for the worst thing you've done. Back at the church, the projector now broadcasts weekly community announcements, a silent nod to its accidental fame. Every year, on the wedding anniversary, the congregation plays a short clip: Rebecca's stained dress, Hannah's confession, the sisterly embrace. They call it the rewind, and newcomers are warned to bring tissues. Offering baskets fill fuller on those Sundays, perhaps because generosity blooms easier in soil turned by testimony. Rebecca, now a mother of two, volunteers with a nonprofit that provides wedding attire for incarcerated women about to marry. She tells them, "A dress is just fabric until stories sew themselves inside." They listen, some skeptical, others hopeful. She leaves, each fitting with a prayer stitched, sometimes literal thread and hidden hems. Hannah teaches creative writing workshops in prisons, partnering with Rebecca's program. She opens classes by recounting her own sabotage. "Ink can destroy," she tells them, holding up her hands, "or ink can set free." Then she passes out journals and invites participants to write the apology they never thought possible. Michael, still raising eyebrows mid-sentence, records a documentary on the neuroscience of forgiveness, featuring his own wedding footage. It premieres at a film festival where critics praise its authenticity. During the Q&A, an audience member asks, "Do you ever regret letting the world witness your private pain?" Michael answers, "Regret is a prison, release is a doorway. We chose the doorway." The closing shot of the film lingers on the quilt covering Grace and her little brother, Benjamin, asleep in a backyard hammock. The camera zooms in until the faint stain becomes abstract art, a crimson comet streaking across pale fabric and then fades to white. Some stories retire quietly. This one keeps working, sliding into sermons, classrooms, coffee shop conversations. Every retelling shifts emphasis: sabotage, technology, faith, sisterhood, but the core remains. Love survives being ruined if someone chooses to love anyway. In the weeks following the ceremony, the small town of Cedarbrook experienced what local journalists jokingly dubbed the dress revival. Sunday attendance at every church in a 10-mile radius spiked. People who hadn't darkened a sanctuary door in years lined wooden pews, motivated by curiosity or conviction. No one could tell which, and maybe it didn't matter. Pastors found themselves scrapping pre-planned sermons to address the unfiltered hunger for grace suddenly pulsing through the community. One evening, the Williamson family hosted a potluck on the church lawn, intended originally as a simple thank you for volunteers who helped during wedding chaos. Word spread faster than lemonade poured, and 200 people arrived bearing casseroles, folding chairs, and open hearts. Children chased bubbles beneath string lights while adults formed conversational circles, retelling the story as though seeking new angles better suited to describe the miracle. Hannah, balancing a paper plate piled with macaroni salad, overheard a young mother say, "I watched the footage with my teenage daughter and asked if she'd forgive her brother that way." Hannah's cheeks warmed, once from shame, now from reluctant wonder that her darkest impulse could seed another family's healing. Across the lawn, Rebecca caught her eye and raised a glass in silent salute. Media attention intensified. A syndicated talk show invited the sisters to appear. Producers requested the dress. They claimed audiences love props. Rebecca refused, stating, "Sacred things don't belong under studio lights." Hannah expected backlash, but viewers respected the boundary. Instead, the sisters shared the story verbally, and producers surprised them with a dozen letters from viewers describing reconciliations sparked by their testimony. Estranged siblings reuniting, divorce papers shredded, and addictions surrendered mid-episode. One letter came from a solitary figure in Iowa, a farmer who wrote, "I poured my last bottle of whiskey down the drain while watching your video. If you can start over, so can I." Hannah wept over that line, realizing that redemption was contagious. Meanwhile, Cedarbrook High School's drama teacher, Mr. Keaton, proposed staging a play based on the events. He believed students needed to wrestle with real-life narratives of brokenness and grace. The script, co-written by drama club members and Hannah, evolved into a montage of overlapping monologues. The boutique designer, the projecting pastor, the trembling flower girl who witnessed the stain up close. Opening night sold out. Parents sniffling into programs watched their children embody a story still warm in community memory. During rehearsal season, Hannah mentored the student playing her younger self. The teenager asked, "What did envy feel like?" Hannah answered honestly, "Like being hungry while standing at a feast you're not allowed to touch." The student nodded, scribbling notes, then asked, "And forgiveness?" Hannah paused. "Like discovering the feast was always set for you too. You just needed to sit." One Saturday, Rebecca visited a women's shelter with several bridesmaids. They brought leftover centerpieces and unopened boxes of wedding favors. At first, shelter residents eyed the sparkly trinkets with polite confusion, but as Rebecca told her story, suspicion melted. A woman scarred by domestic violence whispered, "Nobody gives you a second chance at a wedding dress once someone rips it." Rebecca replied, "Then maybe we'll find you a dress nobody can rip." Volunteers later organized a donation drive that filled an entire storage unit with gowns. Amid all this, the viral video's comment section became a microcosm of humanity. Skeptics posted staged for clicks, countered by eyewitnesses verifying authenticity. Theological debates raged, Calvinists arguing predestination, Arminians touting free will, atheists applauding psychological resilience. One thread reached 8,000 replies dissecting whether cameras represent divine omniscience or capitalist surveillance. Hannah and Rebecca read none of it. Instead, they printed a single comment that simply read, "This made me call my dad," and taped it to the refrigerator. The story even reached an inner-city youth group in Chicago, where pastors screened the footage during a night titled Real Grace in real time. Kids accustomed to digital drama found themselves transfixed not by scandal, but by the moment one's sister chose to stay rather than run. Afterward, graffiti artists painted a mural, two silhouetted figures holding hands beneath a cascade of red transforming into blooming flowers. The caption read, "Turn stains into gardens." Privacy advocates criticized the boutique for embedding cameras without explicit verbal warnings. They argued consent forms buried in paperwork fail ethical transparency. The boutique responded by overhauling policies. Every fitting now begins with a demonstration of where cameras are and a signed audio recording confirming understanding. The local newspaper headlined, "Love leads to policy reform," earning both praise and cynicism. Church leadership faced a subtler dilemma: how to steward sudden fame without commercializing sacred narrative. They declined offers to sell T-shirts printed with the stained dress image, but they did commission local artisans to craft commemorative stained glass ornaments. Proceeds funded outreach programs. Hannah initially opposed monetization, fearing exploitation, but changed her mind after visiting a food pantry built with the ornament revenue. One autumn, during a regional pastors' conference, the Williamson story served as keynote. Speakers dissected its anatomy: confession, confrontation, forgiveness, transformation. In workshops, leaders practiced role plays. What if the sister refused to apologize? What if the bride rejected reconciliation? These hypothetical fractures underscored how fragile the actual outcome had been. By lunch break, pastors exchanged vows to nurture transparency within their congregations, to install figurative cameras aimed not at catching sin, but at celebrating mercy. Still, the overarching trajectory pointed toward healing. Grace Camellia grew into a girl who loved red markers, scribbling hearts on everything. When asked why she preferred red, she'd answer, "Red means love can be messy and beautiful." She didn't fully grasp her own origin story yet, but the family suspected she felt its undercurrent in every bedtime quilt cocoon. On her 5th birthday, as candles flickered, Hannah knelt to help Grace blow them out. The child whispered, "Make a wish, Auntie Hannah." Hannah closed her eyes and wished for courage to continue choosing light over shadow every single day. She opened them to see Rebecca watching, eyes soft with shared memory. They embraced, candle smoke swirling like incense. That night, Hannah added a final poem to her book's 2nd edition, Wish at 5, chronicling how generational wounds can become generational blessings when love interrupts. The poem ends with the lines, "We take the vial from trembling hands, pour out its ink upon the sand, and watch the tide write newborn names, where once were only crimson stains." Critics hailed the edition as the heartbeat of the collection. Readers sent photos of their own beach rituals, pouring symbolic ink into waves, baptizing regrets. But for the family, the poem's power lay not in critical acclaim, but in ritual practice. Every summer, they vacationed at the coast and reenacted it, writing mistakes in water-soluble ink on shells, then releasing them to the tide. Children squealed, adults sighed, seagulls testified in squawks. No cameras recorded these moments, by deliberate choice. Some acts of grace, they decided, bloom best unseen. Years later, whenever someone asked what really happened that day, the sisters would smile in quiet agreement. A dress was ruined, a family was repaired, and every camera in the world could not capture how wide grace can stretch. The ink stain remains in memory, not as a bruise, but as an autograph of mercy, reminding anyone who hears the tale that love may get wounded at the altar, yet it walks back down the aisle stronger than before. If you ever tremble at the doorway of apology, remember crimson can bloom into roses. Step through. Someone is holding the quilt for you. Keep walking.